The rain was falling so hard that night that I could barely see the road ahead. Then, through the blurred windshield, I saw a man standing alone on the shoulder, soaked from head to toe, one hand raised toward passing cars. I should have kept driving. Every instinct told me to keep my doors locked and my eyes on the road. But something inside me made me slow down. I had no idea that stopping for a stranger would become the single decision that changed my life forever. My name is Daniel, and at that time, I was 38 years old and living what felt like a life that had already ended. 3 years earlier, I had lost my wife, Rachel, after a long battle with an illness that slowly drained every ounce of strength from her. After she died, our small house became painfully quiet. I stopped answering friends' calls, stopped celebrating birthdays, and eventually stopped believing that tomorrow could bring anything worth waking up for. I worked, came home, ate whatever was easiest, and went to bed. My life had become a routine without meaning. That rainy night, I was driving home after working late at a warehouse when I saw the stranger. If you believe that one small act of kindness can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Sometimes we never know how desperately someone needs the kindness we almost decided not to give. I pulled over a few yards ahead of him. The man hurried toward my truck, his clothes dripping water onto the pavement. He looked exhausted, perhaps in his late 50s, with gray hair pressed against his forehead and a face that carried the kind of sadness you could not hide. I lowered the window only slightly and asked where he needed to go. He told me his car had broken down several miles back and his phone had died. He was trying to reach a small town about 20 minutes away because his daughter was in the hospital. Normally, I would have been suspicious. But there was something in his eyes that reminded me of the final weeks of Rachel's life, when every second seemed precious. I unlocked the door and told him to get in. His name was Thomas. For the first few minutes, neither of us said much. The windshield wipers moved back and forth while rain hammered the roof. Thomas kept staring out the window, nervously rubbing his hands together. Then he suddenly asked me to turn around and go back toward the highway. I asked why, and he said he had forgotten something in his car. I told him we could come back after getting him somewhere safe, but he shook his head and looked almost frightened. Then he whispered that his daughter had been waiting for him for nearly 6 hours. Something about those words stayed with me. When we finally reached the hospital, Thomas jumped out before I had fully stopped the truck. I watched him disappear through the sliding doors. I thought that would be the end of our story. I expected him to forget my name by morning, and I expected to forget his. But 20 minutes later, a nurse came outside and asked if I was Daniel. I nodded. She told me Thomas had asked her to find me because he wanted me to know something. His daughter, Lily, was 26 years old and had been involved in a serious accident earlier that day. Thomas had been driving to see her when his car broke down. He had spent hours trying to get help, but his phone had died. He was terrified that he would arrive too late. The nurse paused before telling me that Lily had asked about her father several times. Then she said something I will never forget. She asked if her father was still coming. I looked through the hospital doors and saw Thomas sitting beside his daughter's bed. He was holding her hand with both of his, crying silently. I went home that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way Thomas had looked when he was standing beside the road. I remembered all the nights I had sat alone in my house believing that nobody needed me anymore. The next morning, I drove back to the hospital. Thomas was sitting in the hallway with a cup of coffee between his hands. When he saw me, his eyes widened. He stood and hugged me without saying a word. Lily survived. Her recovery was long, painful, and uncertain, but she survived. Over the next few weeks, I kept visiting the hospital. At first, I told myself I was checking on Thomas. Then I realized I was also checking on myself. Sitting beside him, listening to stories about Lily's childhood, laughing at memories of his family, and watching a father refuse to give up on his daughter slowly pulled me out of the darkness I had lived in for years. One afternoon, Thomas asked me why I kept coming back. I finally told him the truth. I told him about Rachel. I told him how after losing her, I had convinced myself that caring about people only gave life more ways to hurt me. I told him that I had spent years avoiding attachments because I was terrified of experiencing another loss. Thomas listened quietly. Then he told me that grief was not proof that love had been a mistake. Grief was simply the price we paid for having loved someone deeply. Those words changed something inside me. Months passed. Lily eventually left the hospital and began rehabilitation. Thomas and I remained friends. I started having dinner with them on Sundays. I began calling old friends again. I volunteered at the hospital, helping families who were waiting for loved ones undergoing treatment. Slowly, the life I thought I had lost began taking shape again. One evening, nearly a year after that rainy night, Thomas handed me an envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed me standing beside my truck on that stormy night, helping him into the passenger seat. On the back, Thomas had written a simple message: "You stopped when everyone else kept driving." I stared at those words for a long time. Then Thomas told me something I never knew. That night, before I arrived, he had watched dozens of cars pass him. Some slowed down but continued driving. Others never even looked his way. He had started believing that maybe people simply didn't care anymore. And then I stopped. He said that one decision had restored his faith in strangers. But he had no idea that his life had restored mine too. A few months later, I started a small community project that provided emergency rides to people stranded on the road, especially elderly people, hospital patients, and families without transportation. I called it Second Mile, because sometimes helping someone means going farther than you planned. Years have passed since that rainy night, but I still think about it whenever I see someone standing alone beside a road. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept driving. Maybe Thomas would have eventually found another ride. Maybe Lily would still have survived. Maybe everything would have worked out anyway. But I know one thing for certain. That night, I thought I was picking up a stranger. I was actually picking up a piece of my own life that I had forgotten how to carry. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may be silently struggling and desperately need hope. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment, "I will stop for someone," if you believe that one small act of kindness can change a life. Because sometimes, the person standing on the side of the road isn't the only one who needs to be rescued. Sometimes, when you stop to help someone else find their way home, you finally find your own way home too.